On Easter today, we are starting a new series called Anchor, Finding Assurance in God's Promises. And so today, we're going to be talking about our ultimate assurance, our ultimate anchor, the resurrection of Jesus. And look, I know talking about resurrection on Easter, it might seem predictable, but the topic we're going to dive into today is not just about the resurrection that happened a long time ago, but it's about the foundation of our strength and our ability to stand firm no matter what your life throws at you. Because the resurrection, it's not just an event that happened 2,000 years ago. It's actually important to our lives today as well. Because the fact that Jesus rose from the dead, it offers a solid foundation, or an anchor, if you would, in a world that we all live in that seems to be shifting under our feet constantly. So let's start with something that we all already know and are acquainted with, and that is that life is unpredictable. Anybody's life, like you don't know what's coming next. It's like, what in the world's happening? And everything constantly seems to be shifting and changing, and we never know what's going to happen next. With our kids, with our spouse, with the people at work. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, something comes along and throws everything off again. It could be a job loss, a health diagnosis, or just the daily news cycle that goes from one crisis to the next crisis, right? With all life's twists and turns, it's really easy to feel adrift. It's easy to feel like you're just one wave away from capsizing, right? But here's the thing, and this is what's so powerful about Easter, and that is that in the midst of all the uncertainty of our lives, we have a hope that has a stabilizing effect. And it's not just any hope. It's a hope that has a name. His name is Jesus. So today, we're anchoring ourselves in that hope, the resurrection of Jesus. And I'm going to show you how to do that because it's a foundation so solid, no storm in our life, no storm in my life, in your life, no storm can move that if we hold on to it. And that's what we're celebrating today. And this is where the resurrection comes into our daily life. See, this is what Easter is all about. Because the cross, the empty tomb, they're not just historical events way back then. They are actually the rock in our life that can create a stable foundation for our lives today. A foundation we can build our lives on. Because Jesus didn't just die for our sins. He did, but he also rose from the dead, conquering death itself, proving once and for all that he is who he says he is, and that he can do what he says he can do. And so this is what we're going to explore today. How does the resurrection provide stability in my life? How does it provide a stabilizing effect for the storms in your life? Or we could ask it this way. How does the resurrection of Jesus, how does that provide an anchor in our storms today in a world that seems to be constantly shifting under our feet? And I promise you, by the end of our time today, you're going to see that the resurrection, it's not just the cornerstone of our faith as Christians. It's also the bedrock of our daily life. It can give us a hope that is as real and as solid as the ground under your feet, okay? But before we go there, I want you to think about, just for a second, the areas of your life that feel uncertain. I want you to think about those and hold them in your mind as we talk about the resurrection today, because no matter what storms come, the writer of Hebrews, he says this. He says that no matter what storms come in your life, we have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. And that hope comes through the resurrection of Jesus. And that is what Easter is all about. That's the hope that we celebrate today. And that's the hope that we're invited to build our life on every single day. So let's dive a bit deeper into something I mentioned earlier, and that's life's unpredictability, right? The shifting nature of life. And for some of you, unpredictable is an understatement for your life. It's like this comes and that comes and this comes, personal challenges, family matters, professional issues, global, national issues we face every day. It just seems like there's always something that's coming at us. And it's not even the big things only. It's the daily, the constant shifts that just keep us on our toes every day, wondering what's coming next. It's that sense of unpredictability. And it's not new, but doesn't it feel like it's increasing lately? It does to me. It's like just the volume of life is turned up way too high, and there's this background noise as well of uncertainty, and we just can't seem to get our hands around it. It's these moments that our foundations are tested when we ask ourselves, what am I really standing on? What's really holding me up? Because the problem is not just the storms themselves, it's how we respond to them, right? It's how we find ourselves sometimes scrambling for something solid to hold on when the ground underneath us seems like it's moving. It's how we react when we're faced with the unknown, another unseen thing that's coming, another unexpected thing that popped up. Do we stand firm? Or do we find ourselves swept away by fear, doubt, anxiety? But here's the thing. The wind, the waves, the unpredictability of life, I'm sorry, but they're not going away. Jesus didn't calm every storm when he walked the earth. And he doesn't promise to calm all of our storms today either. But what he offers us is something much deeper, much more profound. But we find ourselves having to live in this world of instability. This is where we find ourselves is just sometimes standing on the edge of the water, looking out at the waves of our family or the waves of our health or whatever it is, and we're wondering, do I have what it takes to make it across? Wondering what's going to happen next. Wondering if the foundation that I'm standing on in and of myself, is it solid enough to hold me? Am I strong enough to support myself through the storms of life? And the problem is, and we've already stated, is that life is unpredictable. I can't trust life to not change. And because life is unpredictable, it's easy to feel adrift in that world of uncertainty. So here's the question that we so often ask. In a world of uncertainty, how do I navigate it? How do I navigate the unpredictable seas of life without being overwhelmed by anxiety and fear and worry? And the question we all ask at some point is, where do we find that solid hope? Hope in a life that seems so unpredictable, feels so unsure and unsteady, that's shifting constantly. Where do we find hope that's not wishful thinking, but a steadfast anchor for our souls? So, as we explore this issue together, whether you follow Jesus or maybe you're here today and you're not sure about all this Jesus stuff quite yet, either way, I want you to think about your own life. Identify the areas where you feel uncertain, where you feel the ground shifting beneath your feet, the storms that you're facing right now, or it could be the ones that you fear might be on the horizon even. But before we get there, I want us all to remember, look, we're not alone. All of us go through this. We're all in this boat together looking for something solid, looking for something sure. And I'm here to bring you good news, because what we're about to discover is that the solid rock that we all need, it's closer than we think. So here we go. Take a little trip back in time. Imagine yourself in the first century. The air, it's buzzing with anticipation because there's this rabbi, and rumor has it, he's drawing crowds from all over, and rumor has it that he's not just any teacher. There's something different about this guy. And people are saying he might even be the Messiah, the one that the Jewish people were waiting for, the one promised to come and change everything. And look, they needed some things to change because at this point, they had been invaded by the Roman Empire who had taken them over, and they were living under the rule of a conquering force who were the most powerful and cruel empire of their day. And something had to change. And so there was hope in the air that this rabbi, that maybe, just maybe, he was there to deliver them from the Romans and their oppression. And it was in this context that this rabbi, Jesus, decided to give what we now call the Sermon on the Mount. It was his longest recorded sermon. Don't worry, I'm not going to preach that long today. But he turned the status quo of the day on its head. He talked about happiness and love, and he talked about the rules of law and obeying that, but he also talked about grace and mercy. And then he wraps it all up with a story. Because this rabbi He loves telling stories. And so he starts off into a story about two builders. And he uses this story to talk about the very things that we're talking about today, the very things that we deal with today. How do we build our lives on a solid foundation when everything around us is shifting and unpredictable? And as he talks about building buildings, he's not giving architectural advice. He's actually painting a picture of life itself. And so in Matthew 7, he says this. He says, everybody who hears these words of mine and they put them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. In other words, on a solid, unshifting foundation in the middle of everything shifting. And then something happens in the story that happens to us all. The storms came. We can all identify. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. And yet it did not fall. Why? Because it was built on something solid. It had its foundation on the rock. But here's where it gets interesting. To Jesus' audience, this idea of building on a solid foundation, it wasn't just practical advice, it was deeply symbolic. Because see, in Jewish teachings, the people around Jesus, the concept of foundation was tied to wisdom. It was tied to the Jewish Bible, the Torah. This concept of a firm foundation was not a new one. It was tied to the very character of God himself. Because when Jesus talks about building on a rock, he's not just offering a new teaching. They would have identified what he's saying. He is placing himself at the center of their tradition and of what they believed. He's placing himself at the center of what and who they were waiting for, the salvation and deliverance that they had been praying for. So what Jesus is claiming here is that he is the solid foundation that their Bible, the prophets and the Psalms had talked about for centuries. And remember, this is a time and a place where expectations for a Messiah, they were high. The Jewish people were looking for a Savior, someone to deliver them from Roman oppression, somebody to restore the kingdom of Israel to its former glory. But here comes this rabbi, Jesus, suggesting that the real mission of the Messiah that they were waiting on, it wasn't about political or national liberation at all. It was something far more powerful, far deeper, far more personal. It was and is about transforming lives from the inside out, starting with the very foundation on which those lives are built. But Jesus knew that these Jewish people, they were putting their hope in something else, in something political, in something shifting, in themselves. And so Jesus continues, and he says, but everybody who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who put his house on sand. And when the storm came, the same thing happened. The storm came, the rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. And how many of us can relate to that? That in the unpredictable storms of life, when they come and the rains come, when the streams rise, things get crazy and the wind blows against our lives. And there are parts of our lives that sometimes seem to crumble and crash because of it. And honestly, we've all been there. I've been there in parts of my life. And some of us are there right now. Your life looks like this. Parts of your life. And I want to tell you, and even though it may feel like you're alone in that, like it's you against the world, I want to tell you right now, you are not alone. And the reason is because Jesus, 2,000 years ago, he understood and was relating to your situation in this story right now. And so Jesus' longest sermon, ending with this story, he's offering more than a lesson in construction. It's so much more than that. He's inviting his listeners into a new way of living, a way that's rooted in his person, in his essence, in his teachings. He's saying, I am the rock. And he's asking us to build our lives on him. And if we do that, that no storm can shake you. He's not saying the storm won't come, that the rain won't come, the streams won't rise, that the wind won't beat. But what he's offering is strength in the midst of any storm you go through. A solid foundation that no matter what comes our way, we know we're safe. Why? Because he is our rock. And that, my friends, it's the context, the backdrop against what these words were spoken. And it's a call to complete trust, to anchor ourselves in the person of Jesus and in his teachings. Because when he talks about building on the rock, he's not just speaking to his first century audience. He's speaking through the centuries to me. And he's speaking to you. He's speaking to us right here, right now, inviting us to find our hope and our anchor, our very foundation in him. You could say it like this, and this is what I want for us all to really sink in this Easter Sunday, and that is that in the storms of life, in your storms, in my storms, the unpredictability, Jesus is our anchor in all the unpredictability. When you don't know what's going to happen with your spouse, what decision your parents are going to make that's going to affect your family, the decisions your teenager is going to make. When the storms of life come against your job, your business, your marriage, your family, when that person you thought was with you through thick and thin turns against you, and all the storms of life, there is one firm foundation. There is one anchor in the storm that will never move. He's solid, and that is Jesus. And when Jesus is telling his first century audience this, he was echoing what they had known for centuries. Because in their Bible that we know as the Old Testament or the Torah, when they were getting ready to go into their promised land, the land that he had given them, God had told them this very thing. Jesus was just echoing what God said in the book of Deuteronomy, where he had assured them to be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. And when he says them, he's talking about all the challenges, all the giants, and all the storms that they're going to have to go through to find his will and his plan for their lives. So he says, don't be afraid in the midst of all this. Don't be terrified. In other words, don't have anxiety. Don't have worry. Wow, well, that's a big ask, God. Why? How could I do that? For the Lord your God goes with you. In other words, when you believe his words, he says, if you don't just hear my words, but you put them into practice, which is what the biblical word believe means. When we say I believe in Jesus, it refers to believing something so much that you put it into practice. It's not just something you mentally assent to. And when we believe in Jesus and his resurrection, we live it out like it's true. And when we do that, God goes with us. And he doesn't just do it for a while. No, if you know him personally, if you put your faith in him, he not only walks with you through the storm and gives you strength, but also he says he will never leave you and he'll never forsake you. Even if you make mistakes. Look, if you believe, the real word believe, that he died for your sins, and if you submit your life to him, he lives big on the inside of you, the anchor. And regardless if you get it wrong, if you have surrendered your life to serving him and then you mess up, you get off track, he says all you got to do is come back to me and I'm arms open wide to forgive you and to continue working in you. To never give up on you, to never leave you, and to not forsake you. And this word forsake in the original language that this was written in, it simply means to abandon, to reject, or to desert. And I think we all need to be reminded of this. I think somebody needs to hear this, that he will never leave you. He will never abandon you, regardless of who has abandoned you. He won't. He will never reject you. Now, he may be disappointed at times, but listen to me. He will never reject you and push you away. He will never desert you. He is your anchor in your storms, your firm foundation in a world that seems like nothing is secure, nothing's firm. He let men murder him to pay for your sin. And when you come to him, he's already paid for all that. He will not forsake you. No. In the storms of life, Jesus is your anchor, my anchor. And that's not just good news. That's the best news. It's a news that changes how we live. It changes how we love. It changes our perspective and how we see the world around us. It's the news that invites us to live every day with courage and faith, knowing that our foundation is unshakable, regardless of what happens, that our security is found in the one who conquered the grave, because he's not just any anchor. He's the only anchor that faced the ultimate storm, death itself, and emerged victorious. The resurrection of Jesus is not just a historical fact. It's the event that changed everything for us today. It's proof that no storm, not even death, has the final word. Because he lives, we can face tomorrow and every storm that comes with it. Because here's the thing. Knowing Jesus as our anchor, our firm foundation, it doesn't necessarily take the storms away. But man, it sure does change us. It changes how we experience the storms. We find peace in the midst of turmoil, hope and despair, strength even in our own weakness. Why? Because we are anchored, and we have to remind ourselves. We're not tossed about by the latest news, my latest crisis, the latest fear. We're held steady by a hope that is sure and steadfast, anchored in the resurrection of Jesus. Because he's the only anchor strong enough, deep enough, secure enough to hold us through life's cruel storms. We find not only just a hope of stability, but we find the reality of it. And that is why in the storms of life, Jesus is our anchor. And it's not just a comforting thought. It's the truth that underpins everything that we are as Jesus followers, everything that we hope for. And it's one thing to say, well, in the storms of life, Jesus is my anchor. But what's amazing is how practical this is in our everyday lives today. Maybe you're facing uncertainty at work, a difficult boss, difficult employees, difficult coworkers, job security, or just the challenges that come with your business or your job. Or maybe for you, it could be school. Unsure if you can make the grade, make the team, get into that school, a difficult teacher, rejection. If you remember, Jesus overcome the greatest challenge anybody ever had, death itself. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, you can pray what Paul prayed. Watch what Paul prays for us. He says, I pray that you will know how great his power is for those that put their trust in him. And look, that would have been good enough, Paul. But then he goes on and he says something crazy. He says something that's actually overwhelming. He not only prays that we would know how great his power is for those of us that follow Jesus, but then he goes on and he says that is the same power that raised Jesus from the dead. Do you have any idea? Could you get a glimpse of what that means? It means that if I follow Jesus, but then I walk my life reacting to all the storms, letting it bring anxiety and worry, if I do that, then I live in total ignorance that the very power of God that raised Jesus from the dead actually lives in me, in you. And Paul is praying, he's believing in faith that we would just get a glimpse of how solid our foundation is, how strong our anchor in Jesus is, that the same power that raised him from the dead lives big on the inside of us. And we're not facing challenges alone. No, we're facing them with that power. Jesus is our foundation. Wow. Imagine walking around with that awareness. Our approach, our perspective of everything shifts, which means the very atmosphere around us shifts. Or what about our family lives? Marriage problems, parenting challenges, challenges with your parents, challenges, issues with extended family. Our families. The resurrection speaks to these situations as well. Because Jesus' victory over death means that there's always hope for reconciliation, for healing, for new beginnings. Or maybe it's your personal life, because as we all know, life can be hard. Whether it's a health diagnosis, a financial setback, or any other personal crisis, these moments, they can shake us. But what if we remembered that in our darkest moments, and we tend to lose hope and get into anxiety, we can lean into the resurrection and all of its promises. A reminder that no situation is beyond God's reach, that no night in my life is so dark that his light can't get there. What if we realize we can stand strong in our foundation and cling to him as our anchor in our storm as we face any crisis? The key is to see the resurrection, not just as a past event, but a present reality that shapes how we live, how we love, how we lean into every area of our lives. It's about anchoring ourselves in Jesus, letting his victory over death inform my response to every challenge, every struggle, everything I face. Because when we do that, we're not just surviving. No, we're walking into it with a hope that's sure, that's steadfast. It's a hope that changes everything. So, understanding who Jesus is to us and the power of his resurrection. Here's what I would like to challenge you and with this week. This is where the rubber really meets the road, because I think it's more than something that happened 2,000 years ago. That would be enough. But I think that it's practical for us today, and I think it can transform the way we live our everyday life. It can change the posture that we take on the storms and the uncertainties in our lives. This week, I want us to take a good, hard look at our lives and identify the areas that feel unsteady or uncertain or that bring anxiety. Maybe it's your career that's got you on edge. Maybe it's school. Maybe it's a relationship that's feeling a little rocky right now. Or it could be even your faith that's been challenged by the storms in your life. This story from Jesus is more than just a Sunday school story. It's a blueprint for building a life where you can stand firm no matter what comes. But this week, I want to challenge you to engage with this story. Ask God to show you how these verses apply to the uncertain areas of your life. I want you to pray for the wisdom and the strength to start building or maybe start rebuilding on a solid foundation that is Jesus. And then this week, I want to challenge you to reflect, all of us to reflect on the changes that we need to make to align with Jesus. Reflect on the changes that we can make to align more closely with his teachings and his word. And look, this is not about some flash in the pan overnight transformation. It's about taking deliberate daily steps toward Jesus, toward anchoring our life in his truth and his love. Now, some of you might be thinking, all right, Micah, that's a great Easter sermon and all, but you don't know how big my storm is. And you're right, I don't. But Jesus does, and he can relate because he went through more pain and heartbreak than we will ever go through. And because of that, he's not just asking you to weather the storms alone. He's been through it too. He's offering to be your anchor, to give you a foundation so solid that no wind, no matter what happens, no wave can topple you. So, will you accept this challenge? Take the time this week to really dig deep into where your foundation is and let Jesus be your foundation in those unsteady areas. Imagine for a minute the profound sense of stability that we could have if we truly anchor our life in Jesus. It's not just about quieting the storms, although it helps with that, but it's about waking up each day with this deep, unshakable confidence, knowing that whatever comes your way that day, you're standing on solid ground. That your relationship with the solid rock is first and foremost. And it's not just about overcoming the uncertainties of life. They're always going to be there. It's about discovering a richer, more purposeful way of living. The joy and the freedom that comes with aligning your life with Jesus, feeling the weights lifted as you turn over those to the person who has already overcome the world. Imagine the transformation in your heart, in your mind, in your relationships, if we could live out this truth. That's the kind of change. That's the kind of truth that we're talking about. It's real, it's profound, and it's waiting for you. And look, picture a church where all of us are intentionally building our lives on a solid foundation regardless of what's going on out there. Imagine us together anchored in Jesus, because that's when we become a beacon of hope that not only encourage each other in our firm foundation, but also serve as a powerful witness to the world around us as their world falls apart, and draw them into the same hope, the same anchor. So today I'm challenging all of us. I'm challenging myself. I'm challenging you. I'm challenging all of us to just ask ourselves, what changes do we need to make to align our lives with Jesus? Because on Easter Sunday is when we celebrate him as our solid foundation that anchors us in all the storms of life. Would you stand?